One day at a time.
It's that real this time around.
Get on your knees and
This is the point of no return, I can never go back. Life without parole, upstate, shackled and trapped. Living in the hole, looking at the world through a crack. But fuck that, I'd rather shoot it out and get clapped. I've gone too far, there ain't no coming back for me. Auschwitz gas chamber full of Zyklon B.
What's up, ladies and gents? Welcome to another episode of Orwellian Optics, a podcast by Alio Capital. I'm here, co-host Joseph Gradante. I'm here with AJ, our Chief Investment Officer, Tyler, our Chief Risk Officer, and Chris Morgan, our Chief Operating Officer. What's up, guys?
Hey, Joseph. Great to see you again, man. How's everybody doing?
Hey, what's up, guys?
Doing well. Good to be here again.
Yeah, we got an interesting one tonight. Special episode. It's going to be a little bit longer than usual. We're all going to go around the room and give our predictions for the election, both, not just on the presidency, but on the House and the Senate, and why, and, what we think, what's really driving those predictions, because all of us have different views on what's going to happen there. But, what I find interesting is that, according to this NBC poll right here, 71% of Americans think the country is on the wrong track. And so, but then when you look at, the whole list of polls we got here, you have the Emerson poll, you have the Real Clear Politics average. It's pretty much within 2 points, no matter which way you go. Some have Trump winning, nationally, and some have Harris up nationally. It's a little bit different when you get into the swing states, but it's roughly the same. Out of the 6 key swing states, Trump is up by 1 or 2 points in 3 of them, and Harris is up by 1 or 2 points in 3 of them. Then there's North Carolina, which they count as a swing state, but Trump's going to win that state, so I don't even count that as a swing state. But how is the election so close if 71% think the country is on the wrong track? And I know one of the key differences between these candidates, because it seems that Harris has pretty much got along with everything that Trump, has vowed to do, from drilling to getting rid of taxes on tips. But when it comes to tariffs, she has remained steadfast that she's not in support of tariffs. And those in the corporate media have attacked Trump for his position on tariffs, which I just find comical. And I thought, AJ, you could really dive into that a little bit and help us kind of understand what that narrative is about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first off, just to hit on the one point, 70% of people thinking the country is going the wrong direction. That sounds low to me. Every single person I've met or talked to in the last 4 years has probably shared that view, that they think the country's going in the wrong direction. But with that said, tariffs are a unique issue, because I think up until recently, a lot of folks would have thought that it was a case of maybe settled science, in the fact that tariffs were generally bad in a, Econ 101 sense, in that they kind of disrupt the mechanisms of competitive advantage and comparative advantage in global markets under a free trade operating paradigm. But, I think what's become increasingly apparent over the last, maybe 10 or 20 years is that we really don't operate as a country in a free trade paradigm. And, tariffs are unique in that it's really, I think, a very precise tax mechanism that can be levied, theoretically, on both imports and exports in some rare cases. But, there's usually a goal associated with them. And I think it's very critical here to understand what the goal in this particular case is. And it's really to level the playing field from a first principles perspective on how do we create an environment where other countries who have pursued aggressive trade policies, things like dumping, things like subsidization of industries, things like attacking our industries or the industries which America had traditionally been dominant, and pursuing these more aggressive trade policies. How do we level the playing field with them to make sure that American workers are protected from the interests of people who are pursuing these more globalist strategies, both from an economics perspective and from a political perspective? So to me, that's really the meat of the issue, is that, tariffs are a very precise mechanism of achieving that, because fundamentally you can levy them as a government on any industry, sector, particular good, service, whatever, to achieve a specific policy objective. And I think here it just pays to be extremely clear and precise in our language, that what I think is becoming incredibly clear is that American workers need to be protected. Otherwise, it's become too easy for multinationals to simply export all of the production of everything that's become a critical component of 21st century American life to areas with lax labor laws, no regulation, no pollution controls, and simply just push all those negative externalities off on someone else and capture the difference between American wages and developing world wages as profit margin for themselves and their shareholders, which I think is, a fairly widely panned view that like most Americans would really not be in favor of. But for some reason, the laws that keep getting pushed in this country seem to prioritize, those multinationals' profits at the expense of American workers. And that's to me the real issue.
I think that you hit on something really important there is at the end there is why does this keep happening? Why do we keep going in this direction? Well, if we don't have a free and fair press to expose this and accurately report on what's going on, in the direction that we're heading, and what are the real, Ray Dalio wrote a great book on this. Thomas Piketty wrote a great book on this. But the general public doesn't get exposure to books like that. People aren't lined up, in droves to read economics books, right? And so the media, is definitely, guilty in the sense that they're not showing people, right? Because it seems like they're running cover for somebody. Who that somebody is, I don't know, but there seems to be an oligarchy or a plutocracy, a protected class that doesn't want the public to really see what's happening, because I just don't see, like you said, it's probably higher than 71% of people that, think the country's headed in the wrong direction, and yet these polls are tied. So how is that happening? Not to mention, when you look at the swing states, there's overwhelming support for tariffs. Yeah, and more people, trust Trump on the economy, and yet it seems like some people, despite what they're seeing with their own eyes, it doesn't seem like not that every one of them wants to vote based on what they're seeing. And so I think, a lot of people are confused.
Well, I think it's the oligopoly. I think it's the American oligopoly that has effectively contorted the media to serve their interests. And, I know you guys have a whole bunch to say on this, so I'll keep it short. But, when it's so easy to manufacture consent with a few targeted advertisements and a few political contributions, it's so simple. I mean, you look around at the cable news landscape and the traditional, media landscape, and you see the same words, the same phrases being repeated over and over again across different local media stations, across national syndications, across networks. It's always the same phrases. It's always the same talking points. And it's become very clear that somebody somewhere or a group of people is basically queuing up these talking points on a nightly basis.
And you'll even see it on Google now. So most people don't watch cable news or watch the news every night, but they might Google something about a candidate. And now their Google searches are controlled by the oligopoly, it seems, because it's controlling what they see. And essentially, these candidates want two very different versions of the country. And these tariffs are a really, really good example of what those visions look like. One of them, globalization, one of them a little bit more protectionist. Something different. We've seen what globalization does, and it just doesn't work. So I guess when we talk about tariffs, AJ, there are some policy reasons why we would use them. What are some of those reasons that are kind of irrefutable? Some people say that there are bad things about tariffs, but what are some of the goods?
I mean, it's as simple as the fact that, when you're thinking about tariffs, the primary mechanism that you're hoping to achieve is to rebalance the competitiveness of imports versus domestic production for local consumption. So, when you think about what a tariff does, in fact, it's a tax on imports that the manufacturer in the foreign country, the exporter in their frame of reference, is paying to our government, which effectively raises the price of their goods in our local market. And what that does is it effectively negatively impacts the competitiveness from a price perspective of their goods in our local market, and allows our domestic producers and our companies who are employing people and manufacturing and building things here in America to better compete in our local market, which is, in effect, a policy that, while in an equilibrium state, may raise prices to a certain degree. It allows for vast cohorts of people in those sectors, whether it's in manufacturing, whether it's in R&D, whether it's in assembly, whether it's in energy, whether it's in finished goods, transportation, to earn a living wage and a competitive wage that is commensurate with the value add that their labor or efforts contribute to the value chain. And to me, that's the key part of this. Like, you can go look at the bifurcated line that starts, I think, in 1973, where there was effectively a split between the real wage growth of the labor class of people and the profits of corporate America. Whereas up till that point, from, call it, pre-World War II to 1973, you had a kind of lockstep growth of both of those line items. And then after 1973, with the beginnings of globalization, the modern monetary mechanisms starting to kick into place, you see a massive increase in corporate profits and in income flowing to the top 1, 5, 10% of Americans, and basically a flatlining of real wage growth for the working class. And when you see the massive excesses at the top that are protected oligopoly businesses, and you hear these arguments like, oh, we can't do tariffs because we have free trade. Like, there's no free trade right now. This isn't a free market. This is a oligopoly that's protected by a political class that's been bribed off using the profits that the oligopoly has amassed by hoovering up all this excess value that they've earned from offshoring all the jobs that previously Americans had. And it's that simple. I mean, the tariffs are just a precise mechanism to attempt to reverse a small piece of that puzzle.
And on that note, AJ, I want to, just jump in there, because that's exactly, in my humble opinion, Kamala Harris represents. She represents this rancid, political class, and it's not about Democrats, right? I don't want people to get confused and think this is about Democrats versus Republicans. Me and Chris were at an event the other day, and we were talking to these two individuals that like the podcast, and they suggested an idea that we bring on. They said, why don't you bring on people from both sides to debate each other, and then you guys can give some commentary. And I said, at Alio, like, we don't have any political philosophy. We don't even all agree here. I mean, where some of us say we're libertarians, but I know myself, I'm more of an existentialist. But libertarian, it's more of just a way of what do you prioritize? And there's a lot of different things that we agree on internally here. And the reason why we wouldn't do that, because when you limit it to just two sides, what about the guy that you like 40% from this side and 60% from that side? It's very easy to control the whole system when you break it down to two sides. And so that's what the oligopoly, plutocracy, oligarchy, what have you. That's why they've been able to control the whole reign from the top. I mean, George Carlin, bless his soul, and but in one of his last, public stand-ups, he talked about the owners of the country, right? He says, forget the political class, forget that. It's the owners of the country, right? It's a big club, and you ain't in it, and and that's a fact. And when you look at the fact that Kamala Harris, and we talked about this before on the show, she's out there campaigning, actually physically campaigning, not just toting up endorsements on X or Twitter, but she's actually campaigning with Liz Cheney, right? So Liz Cheney, father, Dick Cheney, Council of Foreign Relations, Obama, Council of Foreign Relations, these political actors, they serve the same interests, and Bush and Cheney. I mean, if you asked most people, anyone above the age of 34, 35, up until I would say 2016, before Trump ran, and even after that, what was the worst administration you saw in your lifetime, right? They would say Bush and Cheney, right? Because Bush, and I think this is it's worth talking about, in the context of tariffs, right? Because at that time, right, if you go back before Bush and Cheney, you go back to Bush Sr. and Clinton in the 92 debates. In fact, I'm going to pull it up real quick. I think it's interesting juxtaposition. It's Ross Perot. If you look real quick here, guys.
And I think the first question is over here.
Yes, I'd like to direct my question to Mr. Perot. What will you do as president to open foreign markets to fair competition from American business and to stop unfair competition here at home from foreign countries so that we can bring jobs back to the United States?
That's right at the top of my agenda. We've shipped millions of jobs overseas, and we have a strange situation because we have a process in Washington where after you've served for a while, you cash in, become a foreign lobbyist, make $30,000 a month, then take a leave, work on presidential campaigns, make sure you got good contacts, and then go back out. Now, if you just want to get down to brass tacks, first thing you ought to do is get all these folks who've got these one-way trade agreements that we've negotiated over the years and say, fellas, we'll take the same deal we gave you. And they'll gridlock right at that point because, for example, we've got international competitors who simply could not unload their cars off the ships if they had to comply. You see, if it was a two-way street, just couldn't do it.
You know, and I like that because it's Ross Perot in the middle there. He had been running as a Republican, but then he comes in and what he says there though, right, that he's not controlled by the super PACs, right? He's not fought and paid for, and he stands in the middle of a Democrat and a Republican, right? And both sides had long been bought and paid for. And if you actually continue to watch that debate, you'll notice that there's really nothing that Clinton and Bush disagree on. They have these, small, subtle jabs at each other over, Clinton's protesting the Vietnam War or something like that and burning of the flag, but it's totally non-consequential. And then you fast forward a little bit, later, and you have, Gore versus Bush in the 2000 election. And when Bush came into office, he basically won with the Florida Supreme Court shutting down the recount. I mean, that election was so close. And so a lot of people, they didn't look at him. And it was so close because both sides were like the same thing. I mean, the argument at that time was, Bush was more moral, because he had the whole Monica Lewinsky affair. But that's what the country was divided over. There was no substantive policy disagreements between those two sides. And then you fast forward 4 years later, right? First I should say, while Bush was in office, for a short period of time, he was legitimatized by basically a 9/11. But then whatever, credibility he had with the public for that short period of time, him and Cheney squandered it by, going into Iraq, and there were no weapons of mass destruction. And then you had the complete implosion of the economy. And so it eventually led to Barack Obama having this overwhelming, election in 2008, where people thought all this change was going to come. And not to be all over the place here, but the election of 2004, Bush versus Kerry. I mean, what are the odds, right, that you would have these two Skull and Bones members at the top of both sides of each dominant political party running for office? I mean, you can't even define it as a percentage of the population that would be part of Skull and Bones because it's such a small elite group, and yet they're both at the top of both major party tickets in 2004. So Bush wins that, and then people finally think they're going to get change in the form of Barack Obama in 2008. And yet Robert Gates stays on as defense secretary, and we go from 2 wars to 7. And so eventually that's what led to the populist uprising in 2016. But even that election was supposed to be, Jeb Bush versus Hillary Clinton. And Donald Trump just came out of nowhere. And the reason why I wanted to kind of go over that timeline, because check this out from Eric Weinstein. He's talking about the international order.
There has been a system in place, whether understood explicitly or behind the scenes or implicitly, that says that the purpose of the two American parties is to prune the field of populist candidates so that whatever two candidates exist in a face-off are both acceptable to that world order.
Yeah. And so, I wanted to play that video, guys, because I think Weinstein, he paints a good picture of the other side, right? And he summarizes why there's this push by the international order to preserve the current system, if you will, as he mentions, right? The whole thing kind of destabilizing and spiraling into war. And so, this is how, the institutions across the world apparently view it. Curious, Tyler, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it seems like the current system isn't worth preserving. I mean, it seems like we're getting inherently more and more unstable as we go along. There are wars in the Middle East now. There's wars in Europe. As you said at the beginning of the episode, 70% of Americans don't think things are going on the right track. Potential conflict between China and Taiwan. So, one of the promises of globalization was that it would create more stability in the world, that we'd all be interconnected, and therefore there would be less problems. But I think we're starting to see that may not have been the case.
Yeah, it's interesting. Part of the goal, it seems like, is to pit, like Joseph said earlier, one side versus another. That's how you create instability, and that's how the order stays the order, essentially.
Yeah, and it's critical here, again, to just look at it, like Joseph highlighted, from the people who have something to gain by whether it's destabilization or preserving the status quo or, affecting change that's beneficial to their industry only. I mean, there's multiple different ways to look at this, but I think the key theme here is that, when you don't have an ability to analyze facts in reality from a position of, being able to see the truth, you're able to be lied to, push whatever agenda that, this globalist order, however you want to characterize them, is pursuing, for whatever reason, whether it's profits, control, or otherwise. So, from that perspective, Joseph, to tie it back to the media issue, I think, it's become incredibly clear in this particular election cycle how important podcasting has been to getting that long form style of an interview out there, to let people say in their own words what their positions are and let audiences and citizens make their own decisions by listening to the exact words and phrases of the people who they're trying to judge, instead of having that, highly opaque media filter sit in front of them and tell them, oh, you can't get the whole interview. We're just going to give you a 5-second clip to spin a message, and then we're going to paint over it with a panel of experts, who are basically bought and paid for to spin a message that is whatever we want it to be. And, it's just immensely frustrating that you can go out and talk to 5 different people about whether it's an interview or an issue, and you'll get 5 different answers, but it's not because they disagree about, the nuance of the issue. It's because they disagree on the fundamental facts of the issue. And that's because there's no, collective way to, as a society, arrive at a single source of truth of like, here are the basic facts of the issue, and let's start the discussion there. And I think that's where, this becomes such a critical election and such a critical turning point for us as a country, is that, do we want to make a decision collectively that this is, an issue that we care enough about to take a stand and make some change and start from scratch it, like, hey, we should at least agree on a set of facts that are true and give everybody access to as much information as possible, and not try to restrict and censor and, layer multiple levels of commentary and opacity on top of it.
How do we differentiate from fact, though?
That's exactly why, I turned down, the suggestion the other day that we bring 2 people on to basically discuss things in this Hegelian dialectic where it's these 2 extremes, and then everything has to be kept within that framework, because often it's not that black and white, it's very gray. And, what about we're all just independents, right? And we look at the data and we use data science to optimize policy, as you said, based on, we just agree that there's a given set of facts here. And from there, we extrapolate and we try to, solve our problems. It just, but there's a vested interest, right, in keeping people divided and keeping people arguing. And so, but, I think if people were to just look at it from the narrative of, your local farmer's market, right? Like, when you go to your local farmer's market and you buy, the produce that's grown locally, not only has it gone through less hands and it is fresher and doesn't have those benefits, but you're putting money back into your own community. So if you own, say, just grow out a gas station, right? And you bought from that local farmer. Well, that farmer on his way leaving the market is going to come to your gas station and buy gas from you, and so you're keeping that money local. You know where it's coming from, right? So there's environmental standards to keep it, to factor in. And my point here is that I think everyone would agree that buying local from their community, right, is awesome, right? And that's, you live in Oregon, you're going to buy local in Oregon. If you live in Florida, you're going to buy local in Florida, right? And then there's obviously trade and all that. But the point that I'm getting at is just to simplify this: the notion that it would be better to produce things overseas, and then, but the corporate media, right? They hide so much stuff, so much information from the general public, and you can't have a functioning republic if you don't have an informed electorate. Because if they don't have the facts, how could they make the right decisions? And so that's why I think you end up with 71% of people thinking, "Oh, we're on the wrong track," but then it splits because nobody knows what the truth is and who's in charge. And so, Chris, did you have any thoughts on that?
I think the truth is something that should be judged by fact, like you said. And it's very easy to listen to what people say, but it's so important for people to see and look at what people actually do. And that comes down to analyzing policy and looking at the numbers and looking at the data. And that's so out of reach for most people that's where it's up to people like us to provide the real information and the real data. Tyler, I saw you put your hand up there. What's on your mind?
I thought AJ made a really interesting point about podcasts, because we've seen Trump really hit the podcast trail hard lately. And I guess Kamala has too. I think she was on Call Her Daddy, and I believe all of those episodes, Theo Vaughn, and I hear we have Trump Joe Rogan to look forward to before the election. I think it just speaks to people are maybe wising up that the media is very biased and that we're only getting snippets of things that they want us to hear. And so these kind of free-form podcasts I think it's kind of the campaigning of the future, that we're going to see that a lot more often. It's a chance for candidates to speak directly to the American people in their own words and let us decide, which really that's how it should have been all along. But sadly, it hasn't.
Yeah, I think you're right, Tyler. And I think that's why there's this, all this talk of censorship, and because they see it. John Kerry a couple of weeks ago, was talking about, he goes, we can't just, the First Amendment is the big blocker to prevent them from just knocking it out. If there's a source out there that's sick, as he put it. Well, what if the only source is the government and a few corporate media outlets, right? And that source is sick. Well, then what do the people do? So I'd rather have, 100 different sources out there online, and then adults can, fact check for themselves and decide what they want to listen to and what they want to read, and then have the government do it for us.
Yeah. And part of that comes down to like local news too, and local governments, and having the newspaper be written by the guy who owns the bar, being a part of a community that we've gotten so far away from that.
Yeah, Chris, I think, there's certainly an element here that is really tough to kind of differentiate for people between the issues that impact them locally and the issues that are a little bit more abstract and impact them on a national level, and even things that are, a bit longer of a time scale. And that's, I think, the really, pernicious part of this, and like the real insidious part is that there are certain policies that are being pushed at the national level and at the global level that have, to turn a phrase, long and fat tails. So you're unlikely to see the effects or the full effects of these policies in the same election cycle as the politicians who are pushing it are, saying that you're going to see it. So I think it's a little bit difficult to ever hold these people accountable, because by the time the negative effects of some of these things arrive, they're long gone. They've already got their mansion in the hills and somewhere, and their libraries and all their fancy political accoutrements that they've acquired through favors, or whether legitimate or illegitimate. And I think it's tough because in a local level, it's really easy to say, are these policies working? You can look at things that are simple enough, regulations around things like the schools, the parks, the roads and streets, and, safety, police issues, all kinds of stuff where the effects are tangible, the results are visible. And if you have any issues, you can literally go to a town hall meeting or a local, governing board meeting and voice your concerns and at least get some sort of satisfaction that like your concerns have been voiced and heard. And I think that's a really powerful thing because it allows people to feel like they're part of a community and they're part of a system, that two-way mechanism of, hey, people are out there trying to, serve me, but I'm also, able to hold them accountable. And I think we've lost sight of that a little bit, in particular because of the media issue of not really having a way to grasp some of the core fundamental issues at hand, but even more so because these are incredibly complex issues. You should not be expected to have a graduate level understanding of tariff policy to be able to make informed decisions. But what you should be able to do is, as a citizen, rely on the media to provide expert analysis that is trustworthy and at least grounded in reality and not so tilted by, partisan politics that it's divorced from reality. And I think that's where we find ourselves. You can listen to a single event or a single issue be covered by MSNBC and Fox News, and you will hear two diametrically opposed opinions about how that thing is either very good or very bad. And to Joseph's point, in reality, A, it's not that simple. They're oversimplifying it for, clickbait views and rage bait. And B, even if it was that simple, it's impossible to arrive at two diametrically opposed opinions when you start with a simple set of facts known to be true. So, to me, I think the part of this that, podcasts, to Tyler's point, and the media and, this whole search for truth, that the part we're really driving after is an ability to find places where people who are not necessarily experts in a field can go for trustworthy information without having to spend 40 hours reading graduate level textbooks to come to an understanding themselves, because that's just not practical. There's too many issues. There's too much noise. Nobody has the time, between struggling to buy groceries, working two jobs, putting a roof over their head, to, in their spare time, go home and open up, a international economics 301 textbook. So, from my perspective, I think what we're trying to do here is really critical and really important. And we're joined by a whole host of other folks who have a similar perspective. But I think, if we can do just a small part to alleviate some of the fatigue around the lack of trust that people have in mainstream media and getting fed bullshit sound bites, then, I think we've done, a service that's critical here. So, I'm willing to at least keep talking about it because I don't know what else to do, but I think it's so critical, when you talk with people who just have such a weak grasp of the issues, and, the only thing you can do is try to at least bring them back to a starting point of like, here are the facts, and hope that, you can kind of walk them forward from there.
And that's why they have a vested interest. I mean, if you look at what's happening in our, not to go down too many lanes here, because we could always, get deeper into that into in another episode. And in fact, a couple episodes ago, we did kind of go into some of the stats around education. But, there's a clear, why would that be happening, right? Because that's something that, to a certain degree, we could control, right? Like, and yet it's going down, and it's going down precipitously. It's not going down, at a rate that's, moderate. It's just, and what made us the greatest, at the end of the day, what made us the greatest nation in the world, going back to where it all started was freedom. Freedom and hope is why people came here. The idea that they could be owners, that they could own property, that they could start a business, that they could, that they had an opportunity here in America that they didn't have in the parts of the world that they came from. People had to understand that the United States was not a country. That's why our name is so different than other countries, right? And it's for lack of a better word, is polytheistic, if you will, but it's not. It's the United States, right? It's not Italy or Ireland or China. It's the United States, meaning United Countries, because it was organized around an experiment. It was something different, a set of ideas which is why at the end of the Constitutional Convention, when after a long hot summer of all the framers deliberating, and they didn't agree on anything. By the way, like if you think there's no hope now, I mean, at that point, even when we started, nobody agreed on anything, but they were able to get in a room and work together and hash things out with no air conditioning, right? And so at the end of it, a couple Americans, right? But at that time, they probably wouldn't have identified themselves as Americans, asked Benjamin Franklin, what do we got, Doc? And he said, a republic, if you can keep this, right? And so the key is, is that it's up to us, right, is to preserve our institutions and keep the conversation going so that we can keep optimizing and keep making it better for the next generation. And if we take away our fundamental values and our fundamental, systems, then we don't have any, right? And so, so when you see that decline in education, well, what does that mean? For what kind of implications does that have for us, right? Because that's going to have implications on entrepreneurship. That's going to have implications on innovation. That's going to have implications over the people that inherit the government, that take over the next generation, right? Because they're not taking civics classes and they don't understand the Constitution. What is the probability that they're going to preserve the Constitution? And so as this thing kind of, falls apart at the seams, it's up to the people to speak up and to seek out information and inform themselves and get out and vote, because the only way that they can't steal this thing is if the margins are so overwhelming that, those in power, because right now they're setting it up. If you listen to the corporate media, they're kind of panicking a little bit about Harris. And so supposedly, with their, she's planning on an acceptance speech, along the narrowest margins, right? And so even the corporate media is talking about this. And if 70% of the country thinks we're on the wrong track, how is she going to win the election? And so, it's just up to us. It's in our hands. And that's why, like, even doing the podcast and trying to get the message out there, that's what we're doing here at Alio Capital, because, we care about the future. If you're here and you're not thinking about, how you can make an impact and how you can make things better for the people around you, then what are you doing here, right? Then you're just taking up space and you're just consuming things. You're not really, putting your best foot forward, for the sake of, if for no one else, for yourself, right? Right? Do you want to have cleaner air around you and have harmony around you and not see war and not see people living in the streets? I mean, there's no reason why we should have, homeless people in some of our wealthiest cities. You walk through Seattle, you walk through San Francisco. I mean, we could optimize policy so that we don't have any homeless people, so that nobody is starving. But you have to address scarcity, right? You have to start with what are the resources that we have and how do we maximize these resources? And those are all policy discussions. And there's a much greater probability that innovation will help us solve these problems. Than government will help us solve these problems. Government is certainly part of the equation, and public-private partnerships. And so, with all this, this leads us to the last part of the show where we're gonna do our predictions here. Yeah, I think who wants to start, fellas? Who wants to get out there and put them out? And because I'm gonna go last, I will say that. I want to hear what you guys have to say first. Start with the House, right, and then the Senate, and then get into the executive and explain why.
Now, I will tell you that my kind of theory on all of this is I really like the betting markets. That's where I keep track of the betting markets. There is some research out there that says that betting markets are a more accurate predictor than polls. And intuitively, that would kind of make sense because, betting markets, you're a self-interested individual. You are going to bet on the person that you truly think has the better chance to win, not necessarily the person that you like the most. So there's a little bit of bias that is taken out of it. Now, before I say that betting markets are the end-all be-all for predictions, especially political predictions, I do have to point out that betting markets are very, very similar to the stock market, for instance, and that there is speculation. There can be bubbles. There can be what's the equivalent of momentum trading, where if people pile into one candidate, everyone else wants to pile in as well. That being said, I still think they are worthy of attention. And right now, the average of all the betting odds across all sites right now has Trump at about a 61% chance of winning. So I'm going to start with the executive and say that Trump is going to win the election. From there, it's a little bit harder to gauge. The House is probably more of a toss-up. Right now, there's not really a clear favorite. The Senate, though, it looks like the GOP will hold the Senate this time around. Now, anecdotally, these kind of line up with my own.
Win the Senate. You mean win the Senate, right? Not hold the Senate, because they don't have the Senate.
Win the Senate. Yes, yeah. Sorry, I misspoke there. There even is at least on Polymarket right now, there is a 47% chance of a GOP sweep of both houses, which that seems incredibly high to me. But I guess we'll see. People are putting their money where their mouth is, so to speak. And it seems like there are a lot of folks out there that think that is a legitimate chance. And my overall prediction here is the executive is going to go to the GOP. The House is going to go to the Senate will go to the GOP. And the House, I don't know if I could actually make a prediction on that. I think it could go either way. I do want to make one other point, though, that I like the betting markets, but let's think back to recent history, to the last midterm election. There was a strong push that there would be a red wave. And if you looked at markets then, a lot of people were putting money on that, and it didn't materialize. So there are some limitations with this data. There are some limitations in relying on it too heavily. That being said, I still like the betting markets. I'm going to go with them on this time. Those are my predictions.
So you have to pick for every branch. So you pick the Democrats or you pick the sweep for the House. If you pick Democrats for the House, fine. Or you pick the sweep, all three for the Republicans. Final word.
Final word on that, then. I'm going to go, the executive goes to the GOP, the Senate goes to the GOP, the Democrats get the House.
All right. So I'll start with my final word because it's a little different in that I think Congress goes to the GOP, the House and the Senate. I think Harris is going to win the election. And I like your odds better, Tyler. My thought goes back to, I was thinking about that red wave you were talking about and how unreliable polls are. And I've been seeing some polling, saying both things, essentially, where you could paint a compelling story picture either way. So I was trying to think of things that were different. What happened this time? And I think Roe v. Wade is going to be a huge push for women and younger voters to come out and vote. And it seems like Kamala is voting more favorably among that group, polling more favorably among that group. So I say that she's going to win the executive, but that's contingent on those two groups showing up because I think they will be motivated by that.
It's a really tight race. I think that's, fundamentally a generationally tight race in a lot of respects. In the House, I'm, for that particular reason that you outlined, Chris, the abortion issue, I think you're more likely to get the impact of that turnout there, because I don't think that structurally people do as much research as they should. And I think most people decide who they're going to vote for president and then just go down the ticket that way, which I think is going to have an outsized impact in the districts in the swing states that are going to define, whether the House swings blue or red. So, I think I'm going with a very slight margin to a Democrat victory in the House. I think it's reasonably likely that the GOP takes the Senate. And then we get to the presidency. And here, I'm a little bit conflicted. The betting markets have swung decidedly in Trump's favor in the last couple of weeks. The polls, whether you're looking at, some of the specific polls or the aggregators like Nate Silver, have all trended a little bit back towards Trump after Harris's initial surge following, her announcement and the convention and the debates and kind of that wave that she was riding. Now I think it's become apparent that there's just not much substance. The criticisms of her campaign of, having very little actual substantive policy attached to it, I think are valid. And people, the longer that they have to debate this, specifically the undecideds and the independents who are struggling to make this decision and will define, I think, the outcome of this, are finding it more and more difficult to overlook some of these glaring weaknesses the longer that this plays out. So I think you have, issues where she is losing ground among key constituencies, like on economic policy and the border. But then you have areas where I think she could be underpolling, specifically on the abortion issue and how many people are unlikely to go and talk about that that's going to be their main issue. I think a lot of women and younger voters in particular have a strong preference for that issue, but they're not necessarily going to go out and poll and tell pollsters really, like that's their primary issue or talk about it in social settings. So I think there could be a little bit of an understated there. But with all that hedging, I mean, I think honestly Trump pulls it out here. The momentum's in his favor. The map's in his favor. The swing states, I think, that are going to define this, the specific counties and the districts, like they're all just kind of moving in that direction. There's very little time left. And I don't think the Harris campaign has a strategy to turn that around, honestly, at this point. So that's what we're going with.
I really hope you're right. I like that. And one of the down ballot things you mentioned was something that I was thinking is with the House call is that there will be some Republicans that vote blue at the top of the ticket and then vote red on the way down. But I like your math.
It's interesting because that's traditionally been the case is that, I mean, you look at the 2020 election, it would almost seem as if, right, people, that's what didn't make sense to me, right, is that at least as of election night, when we went to bed that night, because remember the Georgia race, the runoff that happened later, so Republicans still had the Senate and they won the House, and yet Biden wins the presidency. It would suggest people split their ticket. And as somebody that was a political science major, that's not how it goes, right? It's been partisan for a while here, even before things got, even before they got completely bifurcated, with Trump and Clinton, people generally voted down ballot how they voted up ballot. And so that was one of the first things that stood out to me that made the 2020 election very suspicious. Okay, so I'm up. Yeah, I can't explain why, that I think the Democrats are going to win the House by a very, very small margin. I'm talking no more than 5 seats, and I don't know why that is. I just think that I think some of those districts, there's going to be the anomaly where you have some of those purple districts that can go either way. And the ones that are in the hands of Republicans, because there's been such chaos in the House, I have a feeling that where there's more independents in those districts, that they're going to swing it in Democrats' favor. And unfortunately, you're going to have Hakeem Jeffries as speaker. I hope I'm wrong about that. The Senate, let me tell you, there is zero chance, actually absolutely zero chance the Democrats win the Senate. The math, the Senate, really just comes down to the math. You got to look at the map and who's defending it, how many, because things are so partisan these days. There are certain states where you just know how it's going to go. And so you have to look at who's defending, the most amount of seats. And the Democrats are defending way more seats than Republicans are, which give Republicans more opportunity, right, to pick up. And they only need, they need 1 seat to tie, right? Because Kamala Harris right now is the tie-breaking vote. Joe Manchin is retiring. So West Virginia, that's going to Republicans. That's a done deal. Montana, the polls there, his name is slipping me right now, the Republican candidate, but he's doing really well against Tester in the polls. And I don't think Tester can really hide anymore as a moderate because the record's out there. I think in the last election, there was all these pictures. He ran the Joe Manchin playbook with those pictures of him out there, with a gun and the cowboy hat and boots. But he has voted in lockstep with the extreme left Schumer, Senate. He has not, broken ranks at all. There were a few bills where he was given, he was pretending that he might break ranks, but he didn't. Even on the the bill for voting rights, when it came down to he was going to vote for you. He was in support of that, but with the filibuster, he did not vote with Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin to preserve the filibuster. He voted to end the filibuster. Where if that would have went through, they would have been able to basically allow. They would have gotten voter ID laws, right? They would have eliminated voter ID laws, and that would have allowed illegals to vote, and essentially we would have had a one-party system. So the fact that he did that, I think, there's zero chance he's going to be able to win. Montana is over. I think Ohio in the Senate is interesting because Sherrod Brown, I didn't know this, but he's been in the Senate going back to the Nixon administration. That's how long he's been there. I was shocked when I heard that. I knew he'd been there a while, but I thought maybe the early 90s, but so that's actually, so when was it? Nixon, Carter won 76 before. So 74 was the last time Nixon was in office. It was 74, 73.
He resigned in 73 and then Ford. Yeah, that's right.
73. Okay. That's what I thought. 73. That guy's been in the Senate since 1973. And he's always, he's been able to hold on to that seat. And Ohio's a red state. But here's the thing. It's become increasingly redder, Ohio, right? So some states have become, these swing states. Because I remember back in, the Bush-Kerry elections, Ohio was a big swing state. And then they were actually, for a while, they were saying that the presidency went through Ohio. But these last couple of elections, it's been reliably red. So, but they're running very close there. I don't think the GOP has a great candidate there. He's not very persuasive. His oratory isn't, isn't where I'd like it to be. So, and the Democrats have poured a ton of money there. But that's the other state that I think they could potentially pick the seat and get to 53. We'll see what happens, but they definitely at least get to 52. Pennsylvania is going to be tough for Casey and McCormick. But so getting to the executive, the presidency, right? Looking at that Casey race in Pennsylvania, he is not showing up with Kamala Harris. They are not campaigning together. And so that tells me something, right? Because he's a guy who's obviously got his finger on the pulse of Pennsylvania. He's a Pennsylvania senator, and he has been for a long time, Bob Casey. So she is not going to win Pennsylvania. I think Trump is going to win Pennsylvania. I think Trump is going to win Nevada. I think she's going to win Arizona because I think Arizona is just corrupt. It doesn't make sense that Democrats have been winning, these really close elections there. There was an issue recently where they mentioned that there was 218,000 ballots in the hands of illegals as a result of a coding error.
There's a lot of transplants there. Just as a quick point, I know that a lot of people move down from the Oregon and Washington states down into Arizona. It's like the Florida of the West in that regard. So the same way Democratic New Yorkers are moving to Florida, it's the same thing out in Arizona.
That makes a lot of sense because I know a lot of people here in Pacific Northwest that have moved down to Arizona for that reason. So I never considered that very well. It's a really good point. So Arizona goes to Harris for me. The other swing states. I don't consider North Carolina to be a swing state, but that will go to definitely go to Trump. And then you got Michigan and you got Wisconsin and Virginia. Believe it or not, I'm going to put Virginia in there as a swing state because they are going to be counted ballots by hand. Governor Glenn Youngkin. And Georgia, right? So these are the last four states. Wisconsin is going to go to Harris. Virginia, let's just say it goes to Harris for the sake of not rocking the boat too much because it has gone, Democrat. I don't think it's gone to the last. Chris, when's the last time it went to a Republican candidate? Can you look that up real quick? Would that be Bush is the last time? The first, was it 2000? Did it go for Bush? I want to say that, because it definitely went for Obama both times in 2008, 2012. And I know it went for Hillary in 2016.
2004.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing, 2004.
Yeah, so Virginia, let's just say that it goes to Harris. Now you got Michigan and Georgia. And this is going to be really tough, guys. I don't think that Gretchen Whitmer is going to let Trump win in Michigan. And so I'm going to contradict myself here, right? Because I am going to say on the individual, I'm going to give myself a hedge way out here. That's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to say that Kamala Harris, right, wins Georgia, and that, and Trump, we're going to say she wins Michigan, but I think Donald Trump will win the presidency. Now that math doesn't work because the math that I just laid out gives the election to Kamala Harris. So I am going to be wrong on one of those states, but I just don't know which state I'm going to be wrong on. So it's either going to be Michigan or Georgia. One of those states, goes to Trump. He has the election. So I just don't know which one of them is going to go to him. And so I think Donald Trump is going to win. I agree with a lot of what AJ said because it's just trending that way. And I think with JD Vance on the ticket, I think just, he is a wild card in all this, because now all of a sudden, the MAGA vision isn't so scary to the establishment. I think, they feel like they can play ball with JD Vance, that he can, pursue policies that are in the best interest of America, but that are also going to, keep corporations happy. I think, they feel like he's a clean, he's got a great story. He presents well. And I think, in him, they see something, a potential future that, the Harris ticket doesn't offer. And honestly, these last couple of interviews that she's done, I mean, they have been disastrous. Like the Fox News interview with Brett Baer. I mean, I think they're even looking at it, the donors, Democratic donors, the establishment, and saying, wait, are we really going to do this? Are we really going to put this lady in power? Because, I mean, she doesn't have the composure. She doesn't have, there was one of her rallies, the teleprompter went down, and she just started cackling, and she didn't know what to say. And I think, they're having, they're second guessing themselves about whether or not, they can really realistically put her up there for 4 years. Especially with everything kind of moving behind Trump and the momentum going that way. She's not doing well with, minority males, Latino or African-American males. I know this. I heard an interesting stat the other night that as Trump wins 50% with Latino males, he wins the election automatically. And right now, he's above 50%. So if that holds true and he gets more than 50% of Latino males, that would mean automatic victory for Donald Trump. So there's a lot of, there's just a lot of factors there. That the fact that, the swing states overwhelmingly in support of the tariffs. I just think it's going to be really hard for them to just give this thing to Harris and try to walk away quietly like they did with, like what they did with Biden. Oh, and then the last thing I'd say, and Tyler kind of alluded to this, is like, the unions. The unions are just incrementally moving away from the Democratic Party, and each subsequent election, a bigger percentage of unions voters has gone away from the Democratic Party. So if you look, I don't know the exact numbers offhand, but it's been trending in that direction. And so if that trend continues, if she has to win, I think there's a certain percentage that she would have to get in order to win the election. And I know right now she's pretty far below that threshold, because they showed what Biden captured in the last election, and now she's, I think, at least like 10 points below that. So I know that was a lot to cover. And I wish we had some of those numbers there on the screen, but but the ones I will stand behind are, what I said on those on a state by state basis, is that, and most importantly, Pennsylvania. Donald Trump's going to win Pennsylvania if that's going to be his path to victory. The question is, if she gets Georgia to kind of offset that, what is going to be that other state? Any thoughts there, AJ? So if that happens, where do you think Donald Trump's going to fall off those last couple electoral college votes?
It's honestly too tough to tell, because relative to the margins that I'm seeing in the polls, the movement that we're seeing just in the last week, I think is going to lead to a very different picture within, say, 10 days from now than it is today. The challenging part is that, you've already seen some, early voting and some mail-in voting kind of already start to happen. So it's tough to say what snapshot of polling is going to matter the most. But if you had to peg me down, I think there's a reasonable likelihood that, like you said, I think Trump wins Georgia. I think he gets Wisconsin.
So there you go. You just named it. You said Wisconsin. I didn't have to win in Wisconsin. So, because he won Wisconsin by, I believe, about 10,000 votes in 2016. I mean, it was really, really close. And then when it flipped for Biden, it was still really, really close. So I know each election was right on the margin. So if he gets Wisconsin, you have him winning Georgia as well. So, but even if, let's say you were wrong and she gets Georgia, because that's the biggest swing state that she has the best chance of winning. So if she gets Georgia and he gets PA, then your model, Wisconsin would be enough to assume that he gets the scenario that I laid out there, where he wins Nevada and she wins Arizona. Those 10 11. Wisconsin's 10, right? It's 10 electoral college votes.
I couldn't say, but I'll tell you, to me, the trend when you look at the polls over the last week and over the last month, it just keeps trending in his direction. So I think, when this is all said and done, you're going to see a bunch of these swing states land in Trump's favor by a couple thousand votes, like literal, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 votes here and there. I think it's just so close. But, when you take how close it already is now and the fact that things are trending in that direction, and you add in a little bit of that polling uncertainty of there's still some percentage of people who don't feel comfortable probably disclosing it. You get a weird subset of people who are responding to polls. I have a gut feeling it's going in that direction.
So just to give you guys an idea, Polymarket has Trump ahead in Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Now, I think that is a very unlikely outcome, which kind of I alluded to earlier. That's sort of one of the downsides of a betting market is momentum can go in one person's favor and everybody starts to pile in. But it'll be interesting to see how it actually turns out. I feel like we need to start making our own bets here between the four of us, and in a couple of weeks we'll know. You guys are taking the side of the polls. I'm taking the side of the gamblers. So let's see who comes out on top.
Georgia's going to be close. Atlanta there, the Atlanta Metro District, it's been growing and there's a lot of urbanites. And so we'll see because, but that Senate, that left a bad taste in my mouth. I'd called that wrong, the runoff. I thought it was going to split 1-1. And that's what put the Senate firmly in the hands of the Democrats. So, yeah, so we'll see, if that's, it's saying basically that he wins all the swing states. And I think the likelihood of that happen is slim just based on, flipping a coin, right? Probability. It's just, they're all swing states for a reason. So, but, there's been such corruption in Arizona. So that's why I think Arizona, Trump would otherwise win, but why did Carrie Lake win there? Right. So I don't trust Arizona as a state, regardless of what the numbers showed. In Georgia, I think she has a legitimate shot of winning. But if he wins Georgia, then that's everything, right? Because if he gets Georgia and PA, he's going to get PA. Wisconsin certainly, is I think within reason. I don't think there's going to be any foul play there. Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, what she did during the lockdown. I don't know if you guys remember the story when her husband was out there on he demanded that they let him take one of the government's boats out for Memorial Day. And he was like, don't you know I'm the governor's husband? And, it was pretty audacious. And so that just tells you, she's the Gavin Newsom of the Great Lakes. So but apparently Trump does have the momentum of Michigan. So he wins Michigan, then I think, he'll win pretty handily, on the electoral college map, because to me, if he gets Michigan, then he's definitely going to get Georgia and he's going to get PA. So, so before we go, right, I think this conversation right here, right, we all have different opinions on how the election's going to go. It really underscores why you need a dynamic portfolio. And AJ, what is a dynamic portfolio?
A dynamic portfolio is a portfolio that, just to put it bluntly, is diametrically opposed to the static asset allocation portfolios that most investors are sold by traditional financial institutions. It is capable of reacting or adapting to changing market environments. And, what we have in front of us here is definitively, a tale of two cities, or, a situation where there's no middle of the road. This is going to go extremely positively or extremely negatively, in my view. And, in that sense, a dynamic portfolio is one in which you're prepared for both outcomes, but you're able to capitalize on opportunities stemming from those disruptions or those, paradigm shifts or those inflection points. So, looking at your portfolio from the perspective of, what are the likely policy implementations that are going to come from, whatever permutation of election outcomes you think is most likely, what are the downside risks to, your thesis not coming to pass, if you're wrong about that, not levering up and going too overboard into one sector or industry, making sure that you have, your bets hedged, but also, you're able to kind of take those off and react in a timely and effective manner to capitalize on some of these key themes that are playing out in front of us in real time.
Yeah. And you just don't know, like, the election is so close, and what the reaction is going to be based on which side wins, and how the losing side takes it. Who knows what that's going to do to the supply chain, if anything gets shut down for any period of time. And, and we've just seen it in the past couple of years, right? You see what happened in COVID, see what's happened recently in the Middle East. And so what we know is that there's likely to be major black swan events in the next few years. I mean, in fact, it's almost impossible if there's not going to be. You have these two major, superpowers that are, cruising at each other at a high speed, and you already have Ukraine pending, member of NATO at war with that other superpower's biggest ally in Russia. So, right. And then you have us that we're allied with Taiwan. And so China's eyeing Taiwan the same way Russia was eyeing NATO. Not to mention you have, the debt issue throughout the entire global world, so we're at the end of a debt cycle. And Ray Dalio, I think, puts out about a 50% chance that there'll be, World War III in the next, 10 to 15 years. But who knows? It could be sooner, it could be later. You have climate change, you could have national disasters, so decline of the dollar. And so all of this, you have to be positioned for. And so, again, this is Orwellian Optics by Aleo Capital, right? And we're an investment company first and foremost. And so we talk about these issues because geopolitical risk, that is going to be the biggest risk to your portfolio. Not just, going into last year, Bloomberg had, what's the biggest risk of going into 2024? Geopolitical risk. It's going to be the biggest risk going into 2025. It's going to be the biggest risk going into 2026. It's going to be the biggest risk of the next 10, 15 years, because until this issue is resolved, until this death cycle comes to a complete end, and we know who the winners and losers are, it's just going to be this dance, and there's going to be all types of, winners and losers that come out of this, right? And so your portfolio has to be positioned for that. And so that's why we take this global macro approach. And that's why we do this podcast every week, to kind of keep touching on these issues and keeping everyone informed as what's going on. So this has been another episode of Orwellian Optics by Aleo Capital. Don't forget to check us out at aleocapital.com and sign up for the beta. Click like and subscribe below. And check us out wherever you get your podcast, Spotify, Apple. And with that, peace, love, folks. See you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.